Max Olson, ESPN.com, who covers the transfer portal like you can't imagine, joins us on this Friday morning. Max, thank you very much for your time. The portal closed, and yet there's always news. Let me ask you this. Let's start with this. What are or who are, in your opinion, the highest rated difference makers left in the portal that you think could make an immediate impact?
Yeah, guys, that list is dwindling a little bit as players make their commitments and get signed and get rolling on their new program. But I think the top guy still out there would be AJ Halsey from Houston. He's a guy who is a proven starter, was an all Big 12 player last season, certainly a ball hawk, guy that's, played over 2,000 career snaps. And so, at this point, guys like that, you don't typically see them hit the spring portal window. He decided to move on after their spring game, which was a surprise. And, he's got a lot of teams vouching for him. I think at this point, LSU is probably the favorite. And that would be another, just a cherry on top to certainly one of the top 2 or 3 portal classes in the country. But yeah, a lot of demand for AJ Halsey. Miami was in the mix as well. I think he's probably the best out there right now.
Max, who are the couple of teams that maybe have piqued your interest the most with what they've done through the portal this offseason?
Just overall or the spring period?
Yeah. I guess let's do spring period.
Yeah, I mean, I would say spring period, it's been interesting to see, certainly from a Big 12 standpoint. I think West Virginia is one of those that you look at and say, I'm curious to see how all the pieces fit together there. That's been one of the more dramatic roster rebuilds that we've really seen this offseason. And part of that is obviously they had some really good players leave the program this offseason after Neil Brown was fired. But that has certainly cleared room for Rich Rod to go out and get his guys. And I think by my count, West Virginia has brought in 43 transfers this offseason. So just it's going to be a completely different looking team next year. And I think that's interesting to see. Can they find some difference makers there? They brought in Jalen Knighton from SMU, who's a good running back. They were able to bring some good guys with them from Jacksonville State. They got Jamori Robinson from UTSA, who's the American Conference Defensive Player of the Year last year. So I think that's one of some of these teams that are just in these kind of massive rebuilds, like we saw from Colorado a couple of years ago. You're very curious to see, can they find enough guys? Can they get enough competitive depth that they could be totally different, like we saw from Indiana last year?
Yeah, I think West Virginia is super intriguing and don't know what to expect at all, but definitely they're more interesting. And obviously, if I had expanded that question and said, overall, Texas Tech would be the first team off the top of your lips, right?
Yeah, and I think that's probably end of the day they'll probably finish with the number 1 portal class. I mean, LSU's done an amazing job of getting difference makers, but I just think what Texas Tech has done, what they've been willing to do this offseason is pretty remarkable. And I think I know that probably around the state there's a lot of just sort of eye rolling of I think they can just sort of buy their way to the top. We'll see about that. But the players that James Blanchard has brought in this offseason, these are NFL players. This is not just these guys that are overhyped because they're in the portal and they're getting all these offers. These are guys with NFL futures. And so, to add what they've added on the defensive line, I think they feel like they've got one of the best defensive lines in the country now, especially after they added David Bailey from Stanford this spring. Really fortified the offensive line. I like the playmakers they added. That's another one where you're just okay, you got new coordinators, you got a ton of new players. You need Barry Morton to stay healthy. A lot of stuff's got to come together here. But yeah, certainly in terms of flipping their fortunes from an 8-win season, Texas Tech's done an unbelievable job.
Yeah, they need to win the games that kind of tripped them up. Spike Dykes used to do that back in the day. He might beat Texas one week and then lose to North Texas the next. So they got to win those that have been a problem for them, and it's not easy. Does Micah, this is kind of a tongue-in-cheek, does Micah Hudson count as a 5-star transfer in?
Yeah, it depends on what website you're looking at. It's a good question, because honestly, I think that's a thing that like the industry is like still trying to figure out. How are we supposed to handle this stuff? Like Jonte Cook went from Texas to Washington, got dismissed at Washington, just committed to Syracuse yesterday. Like, is he a 5-star still, or how are we supposed to look at him? Like, I think that certainly, I think for Micah Hudson, it's a smart decision to come back, because I think if you have a short run at Texas Tech, a very short run at A&M, and then things don't work out at that next school, like, man, for being a guy who was ranked right up there with Jeremiah Smith and Ryan Williams and all those guys, like, you're in a really tough spot if your next move is not a good move. So I think it's a good decision on his part, a mature decision. I don't think Micah Hudson's going to come in and have a 1,000-yard season this year. I don't know how big of an impact he's going to make. I think he's really got to put in the work to earn the trust of his coaches and teammates again, and earn a role in this offense. And obviously, they've recruited at an extremely high level this offseason to add more receivers and playmakers. So how this all works out for him, we shall see. But I think it's going to be a process here of him, working his way back onto the field.
So the Micah Hudson, I've been thinking about that. Nico Iamaleava obviously was a 5-star player now at UCLA. How many of the transfers, and there may be more than I realize, were actually 5-star players coming out of high school? Do you know?
It's a good question. Now that the dust is like settled, that would be a good thing to go count up. I mean, you do see a pretty like decent number of them. And I think obviously the quarterback position, you're just going to constantly see movement with those guys, and there's just very few. At this point in this sport, there's just very few examples of like the Trevor Lawrence, like 5-star, 3 and done, like go out and do everything you want to do in 3 years and go pro and be a first round pick and all that. Like, we just don't, as we saw with Quinn Ewers last week, we just don't see those stories happen that often nowadays, with all the stuff that has changed in the sport and the way that the money influences it and the COVID years and all this kind of stuff. So I think you'll continue to see a lot of 5-star quarterbacks make moves. And then, I think the 5-stars that hit the portal, I think more often than not, those are going to be the guys where things haven't worked out, where they've had injuries, where they've had issues, where they're just not, things haven't gone the way that they anticipated. But that doesn't mean that, like, that doesn't mean coaches are any less interested. I think there's still, you want to look at the tape and all that kind of stuff, but then you still kind of default to like, okay, well, everybody thought he was good 2 years ago, so we probably should take a chance on him.
Max, when you saw the headline or kind of the conversation going around the last couple of days revolving around Texas and the reported amount of money they're spending, I know there's been some debate on how accurate the number is and a little bit of pushback from Texas. And there's also just that weird stretch that we're still in where people are getting used to being able to talk freely and openly about money and not feel like the NCAA is going to come calling, right? But did you balk at that number, or did you go like, okay, I could totally see that? 35-40 million for a roster.
I think in this specific example of Texas, I don't think it's 35 to 40 million. I know Chip Brown has reported it's closer to 25 to 30. Honestly, I think that probably makes more sense. One thing, there's a lot of this stuff that's just new, so I understand that people are still kind of catching up to it.
Yeah.
One thing you got to remember, these schools are not devoting $20 million of revenue sharing to their football program. They're going to devote like 75% of that or so. Texas will probably, I think they'll from rev share, they'll get probably like $13.5 million for their roster this year. And the rest of that comes from the collective, just like we've seen with Texas Tech. But, if Texas people push back and say Texas Tech has spent more, I think that's 100% right. And I think part of that is like, look, talent retention is very expensive. When you have Colin Simmons and Ryan Wingo and like the Anthony Hill and the studs that they have, those guys, are worth a lot. They'd be worth way more in the open market. One thing that Texas sources have always said is that Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning are not taking collective money because they get so much outside money from actual like real NIL, real brand deals and all that kind of stuff. So, it's not like Arch Manning is eating up $4 million of your cap there either. So I think it's like, and then you look at Texas portal class, like Texas battled with Texas Tech for Lee Hunter, who's a guy that's, going to make definitely over $2 million this year. like that guy'd probably be at Texas if Texas had $40 million, So I think you look at their portal class, they found some good fits, but they haven't brought in a bunch of superstars this offseason. So I think probably 25 to 30 is probably about right, just what I see on paper. And certainly we're going to see a bunch of teams that are in that range. And, I think if you're going to spend at that level, then obviously people are going to have playoff expectations, and they're going to expect Texas to be in the hunt for a national title again.
So if they ever wrap up and sign and move forward with the House settlement and that $20.5 million revenue sharing, and a lot of that goes to football, Max, I've kind of heard conflicting reports. We had a great attorney on. He was fantastic yesterday, Mulvaney, and I've talked to those at GXG Elite here. And, of course, there's the Texas Tech contingent with Cody Campbell being most of the attention, but the millionaires and billionaires they have.
Yeah.
How much will NIL collectives impact post-House settlement, and how many of them might just dissipate and morph into the school itself?
It's a really good question, and I think that the answer is a little bit like the perspective and the answer is a little bit different everywhere you go. I have talked to some GMs who think that their collective will probably kind of fold up and go internal, and I think some of the places where maybe it has been a little bit of a struggle to raise a ton of money from the collective side, like you're kind of comfortable with that kind of moving in house. But I think that we are also like, there's a little bit of like a bubble that's going to come in December here that I think you kind of like the schools like Texas Tech or Texas that, that are spending at a high level. Like, I think you're still going to count on the collectives to step in here and step up, because you have to understand what these players are getting paid for 2025 obviously far exceeds $13 million at many of these schools, right? And so you're not going to go to your players at the end of the season and say, all right, hey, great job this year. Obviously, we're going to need you to take a pay cut next year. Like, the players and their agents are not going to be cool with that at all. So you're going to need to find a way to at least maintain this level of spending, or come close to it. And so, we'll see if like is this cap like upheld? Do people just go, spend far beyond it and there's no enforcement? Like, we'll see how people circumvent that stuff. But I do think there's still an important role here probably for collectives, because there's just a lot more money that's going to go into this roster next year. When I say $20.5 million, guys, that's for the whole school year. That's not just for the football season, right? So like, how school that money is you got to be very careful, and you're going to need more of it, obviously, for 2026.
Yeah, I can't wait for it to be signed, so then we know what else there's still going to be lawsuits. There's still going to be people challenging the portal. Do you think we'll ever get to a time, though, where they limit the number of times you can transfer, and or, as you saw, players who signed NIL agreements, no matter the sport, and then turned around and signed with somebody else? Can they ever curtail that, or is that going to always be a legal issue?
I think if they become employees and they are signing multi-year agreements, then that's probably how you curb the transfers a little bit. It's just that guys are having those buyout provisions, and it is costly, and there is a hurdle to just jumping from school to school. Obviously you've got the Arkansas case right now where they're going after two of their players that transferred, including Nico's brother. Will they? In Arkansas's case, they aren't just seeking the money they've already paid Madden Yamaliava. They're seeking more than that. They're seeking a percentage of what they were going to pay him this year. So, if that stuff is successful, and I don't know that it will be, but it might just be arbitrated and they compromise. But I think that's probably going to be like the roadblock to transferring in the future that these schools are trying to set up, is just, hey, if you want to transfer, you can transfer, and we're not going to limit what schools you can go to, but you're going to have to pay us money. And I think that's not a thing that everybody's going to be willing to do, nor are the schools that you're going to going to be willing to pay those off for you. So how that stuff plays out here over the next few months, I think, is really interesting, because certainly the NCAA is not able to enforce any of its rules around transfers at this point. So really, it's just going to have to come down to contracts, and can you create a system, whether or not they're employees, that is binding, and you have to stay at school.
Max, last thing for you, because you keep up with the portal. and it is such a huge part of college athletics today. Do you go to a certain site and follow it like we used to follow, for example, just high school rankings from various sites? Do you go to an NCAA portal site? Do you have the alerts? How does that work? Or is sometimes that information fed to you before it even reaches truly the portal?
Yeah, it's a blend of a lot of stuff. Certainly nowadays it's a lot of communication with agents about guys who are going to go in the portal and where they're going to visit and when they're committing, all that kind of stuff. Certainly the folks at 24/7 and On3 do a great job of covering this as well and of tracking who's going where. So there's a piece of that, and certainly you try to monitor the portal and who's going in and where they're signing, all that kind of stuff. It's kind of a blend of all those things, and it's pretty time consuming at this time of year. But I enjoy it. I'm sure there are fans that are quite frustrated by it, and you want to feel like you want to feel like high school recruiting matters and that you're going to get a guy in your program who's going to be there for 4 or 5 years and develop. And obviously the model is totally changed. I understand the frustration of it, but I think that just the way that roster management and player acquisition and all that is changing right now. It's changing on a daily basis, and it's been pretty fascinating to cover.
Thank you for getting on early with us, Max. Appreciate it. Have a great weekend. And thank you so much for your time. Max Olson, ESPN.